Back. And now I recognize Mr. Peters, the gentleman of California, for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the hearing. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming. It's great that you're here. In your testimony, you note that the various challenges ORR faces in providing high-quality care for unaccompanied children calls for a whole-of-government approach. And for example, we heard about ORR's partnership with the Department of Labor to address trafficking, and I know that ORR works with state governments, including my home state of California, our home state of California, to resettle refugees and provide them with services. And I want to make sure that we continue to support this effort so that the coordination remains helpful and productive. So, Mr. Secretary, can you tell us how ORR is working to improve cooperation with state and local governments? I think this came up a little bit before, but particularly with respect to connecting children with post-release services.
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I want to salute the folks in our state of California for their cooperation at the local level to work with us. When we had to stand up under very difficult and emergent circumstances back in 2021, facilities to be able to provide shelter and beds for children, we were able to work with the city of Long Beach, the county of Los Angeles, with the city of San Diego to stand up facilities. We had no choice but to use convention centers. We turned convention centers into a place for children to sleep, eat, get their care. All those things were done with the strong cooperation of the local leadership in those cities and counties. That's what we continue to do with, once we have released a child to a vetted sponsor, where we can, as we've heard, we try to do post-release services. Sometimes we coordinate, we work closely with the local government services that are there, and we will do everything we can to make sure that we're working closely with our partners at the city, county, and state level.
Thank you. I know Mayor Gloria appreciated the work of the federal government in that instance, and it was great we could all come together and use that asset, which, you know, sadly wasn't being used for conventions. It was a really smart thing to do at the time. But I guess not all states probably are working as productively with ORR, and some states refusing to license ORR facilities in their states. When a state refuses to collaborate, you know, what's the other side of that? How are children hurt? What is ORR doing to support children in states where you don't maybe have the same kind of partnership?
Yeah, we've had a couple of circumstances where a couple of states have actually tried to de-license facilities that we use to provide care. We seek facilities that are going to care for these children while we have them in our custody that are licensed, that have gone through the process to receive a state license to actually offer care to children. We don't just care for these kids in a facility without people who are trained. Licensed care facilities we use where we can. And believe it or not, there are some states that are trying to prevent us from actually providing the care for these unaccompanied children through licensed facilities. It obviously harms the children if we can't try to protect them by having people who've gone through the licensing process. But what we've done is decide if they're going to shirk their responsibility, we're going to do what you would expect, which is to make sure that we abide by those standards that would be required of any facility that did get a license.
Children can arrive with complicated pre-existing conditions, some of which may be fatal, as unfortunately has been the case a few times this year. What do you do to ensure that all children in ORR's care have access to high-quality medical care? And again, this is something you talked about a little bit in terms of your ability to follow up under the current law.
Yeah, and that's where these licensed care facilities are so important, because they don't get a license unless they can provide that level of service, and in some cases, health care, medical services. We make sure that children receive the services that you would expect of any child. As I keep saying, kids are kids. We're going to treat them like your kid, my kid, anyone's kid. Children should not have to go through the trauma of being mistreated simply because people don't know who they are, have they not been around for a long time. And so we will provide whatever health care is available, both through our facility, and sometimes, as you've mentioned, we actually send them to medical facilities in the surrounding area. Oftentimes, we have had kids who come with pre-existing medical conditions, and we have had circumstances where we have had children who are terminally ill come to our care.
Mr. Chairman, you remember Mr. Secretary, you remember the clock here. I'm running out of time, but I just want to say that I think everyone here understands that OR has a heavy responsibility to these children. I want to thank you for exercising the leverage of partnerships with states, localities, local organizations to make sure that we do take as good a care of these kids as we can. Thank you for your hard work, and if we can be helpful, let us know. I yield back.
And thank you to you when we were in San Diego with those facilities.
Gentleman yields back. And now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Becerra, I hate to do this, but I have some concerns about your testimony based on testimony you gave in another hearing held April 27, 2022 before the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee. And in that hearing, I asked you about a final rule that included a provision that will provide financial incentive for doctors to create and implement an anti-racism plan. And
Congressman, I'm having a very difficult time hearing you.
I said that I asked you a question about a provision and a final rule that would provide an incentive for doctors to create and implement an anti-racism plan. And your response was that we don't have a policy as you described. The testimonies before you underlined and highlighted. And you went on to say this, and you've used these words multiple times thus far in this hearing. Said much of this is driven by myths and disinformation. You said, I would challenge you to show me where in our policies we call anything we are doing anti-racism policies. The very next day, in a Ways and Means Committee hearing, Ranking Member Jason Smith, now Chairman Jason Smith, asked you basically the same question, and you responded, and in my opinion, rather dismissively, that no such plan existed, and you said, I think it's unfortunate that too much misinformation and disinformation is put out there on what's being done. That's what confuses Americans. Chairman Smith and I submitted a letter to you pointing this out, and we pointed out that that you said that HHS does not have a policy as I think were referring to me, described, and that much of this is driven by mis and disinformation. One day later at the Ways and Means Committee, you gave the same response to Smith's questions. You responded to Chairman Smith's letter. You did not respond to me. And at the bottom of that page, the create and implement an anti-racism plan improvement activity, IAAHE 8, which was adopted through notice and comment. I've also provided the cover page for the rule that was dated November 19, 2021, more than 5 months, or right out 5 months before that hearing before the Energy and Commerce Committee. And I've also provided you with the section in it under the proposed activity title. Would you read that?
You'd like me to read what?
The year and future years, it's clipped together there. It should be about the second group of documents there. I'll read it for you. The proposed activity title is create and implement an anti-racism plan. And in the proposed activity description, it says an understanding of race as a political and social construct, not as a physiological one. And then the final action after consideration of the public comments received, we're finalizing this activity as proposed. Now that's very problematic for me because I was very deferential to you in that hearing, and you commented on that. It's in the transcript. And I expected an honest answer. And I'm not saying you didn't give an honest answer, because if you answered truthfully, that means you did not know what was going on in your own agency. So what I want to know today, Mr. Secretary, is did you answer honestly, or were you uninformed 5 months after this rule was submitted?
Congressman Palmer, first, let me thank you for the way you've posed the question, and thank you for the information you have before me. I can guarantee you that when I answered your questions, I answered them honestly, to the best of my knowledge. If you're providing me with information that shows some inconsistency in what I may have said, I'll take a look at this and try to get back to you. But first and foremost, I owe you that because of the way you respectfully asked the questions, and I will try to as respectfully respond back to your questions.
Well, you've served in Congress, you've served as an Attorney General.
Yes, sir.
And I take this very seriously.
I appreciate it.
And what prompted this is the constant reference to disinformation and misinformation. We're very concerned about the well-being of these children. And we have evidence that things aren't as well as maybe you think they are. And I want to get to the bottom of this, but I also want to make sure that when any member of any administration, Republican or Democrat, comes before Congress, takes an oath to give truthful testimony, that that's exactly what we get. Now, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to enter this into the record, and we'll follow up on this later. I respect you and your willingness to respond back to us and clarify the record. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. And I would like to enter these documents into the record.
And we will take that up at the end of the hearing. I assume you provided that to our staff so they can provide it to the Democrats as well.
Congressman Palmer, thank you very much.
Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank the gentleman. He yields back. Now recognize gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for her 5
Thank you
minutes.
so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's great seeing you, and thank you for coming over today. I've been working on these ORR issues for a long time, as you know, and frankly, your agency and the Biden administration in general inherited a terrible immigration crisis, and particularly kids that came across the border under the Trump policies of separation of families really are. I want to talk about that in a minute with you, but they've been really devastating, and your agency has been forced to sort of try to put it all back together on a real-time basis. So I just want to ask a couple questions. The first thing that happens, an unaccompanied minor comes across the border, and immediately they're placed in ORR's care. After they come, within 72 hours, I think, right?
They actually go into care at CBP,
Right.
and then they process them,
And then they put them into your care.
and they are required to try to do that within 72 hours.
That's correct. So then the next thing that happens is the agency attempts to find relatives or other people in which to put the kids' custody. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that happens with most of these kids. Is that correct?
All of the kids. We make
No, I mean, you don't find relatives of all of the kids.
the vast majority we do, but not all.
That's correct. And so then you have a process. And most of the kids are placed quickly, but not all of them, right?
That's correct.
And so the ones that are this is where, so for the small percentage where you don't immediately find somebody, this is where you take them into custody and you put them in these certified facilities, and then you try to find an appropriate place to put these kids. Is that right?
That's correct. And over, we're looking for sponsors.
Right. So then these kids are placed, and then there are these voluntary follow-up calls that are made to these families. Is that right?
That's correct.
But under law, the families aren't required to respond to that, are they?
Unfortunately, that's correct.
Right. So when you're looking for these placements, this is where you were telling my colleagues, you do the background checks, you check out the homes, you do the home inspections where necessary. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, and by the way, you don't have the ability legally to take these kids back into custody if there's some kind of a problem. Is that right?
That is correct.
So all of this process it's costly, and it takes a lot of money, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So if we were to cut ORR, so we're all concerned about these kids, and I do believe my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they're all parents too. We do care about these kids, but you can't do something with nothing. So if you cut the budget of ORR by 60%, I would say it'd be kind of hard to do all of those procedures that you just delineated for me. Would that be right?
Not just hard, impossible.
Right. You couldn't do the background checks. You couldn't run your certified centers. You couldn't do the home inspections. You couldn't do any of that for anybody, right?
It'd be near impossible to do it.
So you don't have to answer this, but it seems to me if everybody was so concerned about these children, they would increase your budget so you could do a more thorough investigation, so you could have better care for these kids, and so that you could really serve them right.
Children are children. We owe them care.
Right. Okay. I just want to get a quick report. I'm running out of time, but we still, in May of this year, we still had 868 kids from the previous Trump administration separation of families that we had not found their loved ones. They hadn't been reunified. And it's getting harder and harder as time goes by because many of those parents have gone back to their home countries. Do you have a status report for me on what's going on with that?
Congressman, we can follow up with you. Most of that activity is handled by the Department of Homeland Security, but we work with them when they are children, minor children.
Okay, if you can get back to me, that would be great. I kind of want to know how many of those 868 kids we have found their families, and then what we're continuing to do about the rest of them. We had a lot, I was the chair of this subcommittee then, and we had a lot of hearings on it. It was just heartbreaking to see what the Trump administration did to those families. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the vice chair of the subcommittee, Ms. Lesko from Arizona.
Thank you,
5
Mr.
minutes.
Chair. Thank you, Secretary. Secretary Becerra, I have the requirements here needed to become a foster parent for dogs and cats through City Dogs and City Kitties Rescue in D.C. All the people who want to take a dog or cat into their home need to fill out an application, are interviewed by the rescue shelter, and their home is inspected. Mr. Becerra, does ORR inspect the homes of 100% of the prospective UC sponsors?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question.
Yes or no, please? 100%. Do you inspect the homes of the UC sponsors?
We do a thorough vetting process of any sponsor.
Do you, yes or no, 100% of the UC sponsors, sir? Do you inspect the homes of the unaccompanied children proposed sponsors?
We will often do home studies of
Well,
some of
I
the
guess that's a no.
prospective sponsors.
If you don't, which I assume you don't since you didn't answer yes or no, why is it that dogs and cats that are being foster parent in DC homes get a more thorough vetting and their homes are inspected, and not the sponsors of unaccompanied children being put into homes?
Congresswoman, we do a thorough vetting process that
Do
includes...
you inspect all of the homes?
We do a thorough vetting process of the individual.
You're not answering. Okay, my next question is, in Arizona, an individual seeking to become a foster adoptive parent and all adults living in that same household must pass an FBI and local criminal background check and have a level 1 fingerprint clearance card issued by the Department of Public Safety. What percentage of sponsors have completed FBI background checks?
Every person who wishes to become a sponsor goes through background checks before they can participate in our...
What percentage have passed an FBI background check?
There are any number of background checks that they go through. It could
You're not
include
answering
fingerprinting
again.
or
What
DNA,
percentage of
voluntary DNA
sponsors have
testing.
undergone sexual offender registry checks?
We do sexual offender checks on anyone who wishes to be a sponsor.
100%.
That is one of the checks that we do.
100% on all the sponsors.
Any
That's my
person who
question.
wishes to be a sponsor has to go through these background checks.
So 100%. Is your testimony that 100% of the prospective sponsors get a background check on the FBI background check, the sexual offender registry check?
I've answered the question, but I'll say it once again.
You have not answered the question, sir.
So, Congresswoman, I have answered your question, but I will say it again. Every person who wishes to become a sponsor must go through a background check. It could include fingerprinting. It could include voluntary DNA testing. But it certainly includes things like a sexual offender check.
It includes it. But you have not answered if 100% of the sponsors are required to pass an FBI background check and a sexual abuse and child abuse neglect registry check.
My written testimony lists all the things we do to go through the vetting process. If you would like to follow up with further detail, more granular.
No, I'd like you to answer the
We can follow
question if
up
100% of the sponsors have to pass an FBI background check.
And as I've said, Congresswoman.
Just say
every
yes or
person-
no. That would be simpler, wouldn't it?
I'm answering the question, and
No, you
the
haven't.
answer is that we make sure that every person who wishes to apply to be a sponsor must go through a rigorous set of tests, including a background check.
Well, you haven't said if they have to do an FBI background check. You haven't said if 100% of them have to do a sexual abuse or child abuse and neglect registry check, as is required in Arizona for foster parents. I mean, so why is it that ORR has different standards for checking than Arizona does for vetting foster parents? Is it because they're unaccompanied children, because they're illegal immigrants? What is the reason?
And Congresswoman, that is an excellent question, because you're equating the program we have with a foster care program, and that's the crux of the problem. We don't have the same authorities that a foster care program has in your state. We cannot track these kids the way you might want to track.
I didn't say about tracking the kids. I'm talking about vetting the sponsors.
It's the same process. In order to place someone in
You do
foster
have the
care,
authority.
that individual, that adult has to go through a process. We don't have the same authorities.
Mr.
that states have.
Becerra, if you are vetting these sponsors so great, how come, according to the Florida statewide grand jury documents, one single family in Austin, Texas, had more than 100 children sent to it by ORR? Another Texas address had 44 children. A third had 25. In Pennsylvania, one caseworker told the Times he went to check on a child released to a man who had applied to sponsor 20 other minors. I do not think that you are doing an adequate job, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.